Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come in the second chapter of the first book of Samuel. There's a lot to cover here, some 36 verses. We'd like to, if possible, make it the whole way through. That being said, we have to condense our preamble to the mandatory minimum. So in the opening chapter, we read of an Ephraimite by the name of Elkanah, and he has two wives, one of whom is Hannah, the other is Peninnah. Hannah is barren, and which was considered a curse in the ancient world, and her situation is not made easier by the gloating of his other wife, who kind of shoves it in her face. And so she prays for a son. She prays to open her barren womb. We don't read too much about what she prays for, but we know that she prays for a son. And in the second chapter, we read that her prayer is answered by the 20th verse of the first chapter. She names him Samuel. And then her expression of praise, we read a more detailed prayer in response to the praise of having her prayer answered. And much of the material is overlap or has a remarkable similarity between what we read of in the Magnificat. This is the Mother Mary's prayer in response to the virgin birth, and also the Benedictus, which is John the Baptist's father's prayer of praise for his barren wife. So oftentimes we read of barren wives, beginning with Sarai, as she was then known, who conceives Isaac in her ripe old age. Also Samson's mother was barren, and Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, was barren. So Hannah is not the only one, but she is the one we'll be focusing on today. So we're going to open with the opening verse. And Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in Yahweh. My horn has been high in Yahweh. My mouth is open wide over my enemies, for I have rejoiced in your salvation." So she has an occasion to rejoice in the fact that she was barren, and she had her prayer had been answered. She had prayed fervently for a son. It was delivered. She named him Samuel. She dedicates him to the high priest, whose name was Eli. We're going to learn more about him and his sons in the passage that we'll be covering. And eventually we read that she is given 5 more sons. So the lesson learned is that we dedicate what we have to Yahweh, and he will replenish us fivefold or manyfold over. And her mouth is open wide. This is the natural response of being blessed. It's to bless the one who has blessed you. So whenever we receive blessings, the appropriate response is to pray and bless the one who has blessed us. There is no one sacred like Yahweh, for there is no one besides you, and there is no rock like our Elohim. There literally is no one else like him. He is uniquely divine. So even though there is this host of polytheistic pantheons in just about every culture, none of them were real. Yahweh alone was metaphysically real, and he exists on a higher metaphysical plane than any of us. So his reality, even though we can't see him, behold him, or touch him, he does exist, and he is unique. He alone, of all the deities we can pray to, can answer our prayers because he actually exists, and he does listen. And the rock is an image of his strength, stability, and steadfastness. This is not the only occasion in Scripture where he is compared to a rock, far from it. Do not multiply words so proudly, let no arrogance come from your mouth, for Yahweh is an El of knowledge, and by him deeds are weighed. So in contradistinction to the other wife, who was boastful at the fact that she had borne children, Hannah is humbled by the fact that she had conceived. So her wish and the accommodation of her request humbles her without inflating her. So she did not she got what she wanted, but she did not use it to flaunt it in anyone else's face. She was a humble woman, and arrogance is an inappropriate response to being blessed, because it's not anything we do or earn to achieve the blessing. It is only through humility and humble prayer. And Yahweh is of knowledge. That's an understatement. He is an omniscient being. That's the attribute of unlimited or infinite intelligence. And he is the one to whom we must answer. By him deeds are weighed, so all of our actions, words, and attitudes will one day be judged accordingly. Bows of the mighty are broken, and those who stumble shall be girded with strength. So this is a paradox and a reversal. Yahweh delights. It is when we are strong that we are weak. This is the juxtapositive passages such as 2 Corinthians 12, 9, 7 through 10 or somewhere thereabouts, where Paul expounds on the paradox that he boasts in his weakness, because when he is weak, he is strong, and also those who are strong. So this message, the good news message, turns losers into winners and winners into losers. It turns victims into conquerors and conquerors into victims, and they're going to have no one to protect them, no one to mourn over them when they are cast into hell at the final day of judgment. The satisfied have hired themselves out for bread, and the hungry have ceased. Even the barren has borne 7, and she who has many children pines away. So there's a reversal in his order of justice, that those who are well fed will be hungry later. This we read of in Luke 6 chapter. Woe unto them who are full and satisfied now, for they will starve later. Terrible paraphrase, but the concept is, I believe, accurate. And those who have borne many children will have their precious possessions displaced if they are arrogant about it. And even the barren has borne 7. We read eventually that she does bear 5 children after conceiving Samuel. So her barren womb is not only able to conceive 1 child, but in fact 6. And Samuel is the first one. And because she dedicated him to Yahweh, Yahweh reciprocated her generosity by bestowing on her 5 more children. Yahweh puts to death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and rises up. So within the Creator is the power of life and death, not only temporal, but eternal. And so the grave would have been an allusion to hell, and raises up is a resurrection, and an allusion to the resurrection, so that those who die in their sins, who do not die in their unrepented of sins, can only expect hell, judgment, and punishment, and eternal death, whereas those who repent, forsake, and forgive others for their sins will be resurrected and exalted into a position of physical proximity to Him in the heavenly homeland which awaits us. Yahweh makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. So I've heard the definition of wealth is not in the number of possessions, but in the fewness of wants. So even when we are abased or abound, we can be rich, and she considered herself rich to have even 1 child, and eventually, as we've already covered, she's going to have 5 more. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the dunghill to sit with princes and make them inherit a throne of esteem. For the supports of the earth belong to Yahweh, and He has put the world upon them. So as the creator and controller, the entire universe owes its physical structure, and also the maintenance and the operation of the motion of it all is owed to Him. So He laid the foundation of the earth, and this reminds us of what He said to Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" But that's not necessarily relevant, so we're just going to read the next verse. He keeps the feet of His kind ones, but the wicked are silent in darkness. For man does not become mighty by power. Man does not become mighty by power. The great unanswered question then is, how do we become mighty? And it is in weakness. So those who are powerful and strong and rich in the ways of the world will be weak and poor and worthless in the world to come. So again, there's that paradox and that reversal. Much of what we see in the world today will be in for a rude awakening and a dramatic reversal in the afterlife. Those who oppose Yahweh are shattered. From the heavens He thunders against them. Yahweh judges the ends of the earth, and gives strength to His king, and exalts the horn of His anointed. So if you are antagonistic towards, or oppose, or align yourself, or declare yourself an enemy against Yahweh, you have no chance of not being shattered, and He will thunder from the heavens against you. The thunder is likened to a form and expression of His judgment, so you have no way of not being, if you alienate yourself and declare yourself an enemy to Him. The world is at war with Yahweh, but He is always laboring to turn his enemies into his children, and he judges the ends of the earth. That means everyone in it, from the east to the west, the north to the south. Literally no one can escape judgment. Judgment is the great equalizer and the democrat. So much, even though much of what we experience and live in life is not democratic, we will all be reduced. Death is democratic in that it comes to us all equally, and it makes us all equal when it comes. But those who are diminished and demoralized in this life have a better chance of expecting exaltation in the life to come, whereas those who exploit and oppress will themselves be victims with no recourse, no one to turn to, no one to comfort them in the dreaded day of judgment. And she also alludes to the king, so she would have been familiar with the passage in Deuteronomy 17. And in fact, her son was an instrumental figure. Her son was a priest, a prophet, and a judge, and he was instrumental in the proto-monarchical period of Israel. So in the 8th chapter we read that Israel is clamoring to have a king like the nations all around them. They lost sight of their uniqueness, but Hannah has a sight of his uniqueness, and they are to reflect their uniqueness by being submitted to him as king without an earthly or human king. But Yahweh instructs him to give in to their demands, and he sends Saul as punishment and anoints David. So the horn of the anointed, Samuel will be the one to anoint both Saul and David was Saul's replacement. These two figures eventually become human protagonists in the first book of Samuel. And Elkanah went to his house at Ramah, but the youth served Yahweh before Eli the priest. So he was adopted, even though he was born by these two parents in Ephraim. That's the location of Ramah, where he's from. The youth is dedicated to Eli the priest, the high priest, and so in response to her prayer of being blessed by Yahweh, she gives what Yahweh has given her back to him, and as a reciprocal response, she is blessed and endowed with 5 more children. I've probably already said that enough too much, but we'll read of it eventually. And the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They did not know Yahweh. So having a godly parent is no guarantee that you yourself will be godly. As a general principle, those who are molded and refined in Christian homes become Christians, but there is not an exact promise or formula that will necessarily be the case. Now, why Eli's sons were so wicked, Belial was a term of Satan. They were sons of Satan and did not know Yahweh. Why did they not know Yahweh when their father was the high priest? It's ultimately speculative, and we try to avoid speculation, although we do occasionally indulge. We're going to try and avoid it now, but for now it just suffices to say that they were wicked. Their father was not necessarily wicked, but he was an overly indulgent parent. As we read, his disciplinary measurements and his rebuke are half-hearted as best. And the ruling of the priest with the people was that when any man offered a sacrifice, the priest's servant shall come with a 3-pronged flesh hook in his hand while the meat was cooking. So this was the proper protocol to sacrifices. Sacrifices were implemented as sacrifices for sin. The Old Covenant Jews used animal sacrifices, and there were specific ones for specific sins. There was an entire protocol and process and rationale of which we read most extensively in the book of Leviticus. And here we read that the 3-pronged fish hook was while the meat was cooking, was the protocol in this specific situation. And shall thrust it into the basin or kettle or cauldron or pot, and the priest would take for himself all the flesh hook brought up. Thus they did in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Now Shiloh was a city before Jerusalem was established as the capital city by David. The aboriginal inhabitants were Jebusites. David drives them out eventually and establishes Jerusalem as the central city, the capital city of the United Kingdom of Israel. But before that, Shiloh and Gibeon and a few other places were places where the Ark of the Covenant rested, and so that is where Eli's sons and himself are ministering at this time, and Samuel is ministering more effectively and more worthily than his biological sons. He's essentially an adopted son. He's entrusted to his care by his biological parents at the tender age of 3. And before they burned the fat, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who slaughtered, "Give meat for roasting to the priest, for he does not accept cooked meat from you, but raw." So there were standards and protocol as to what types of animal could be offered. They had to be without spot, without blemish. This was a typological allusion to the sinless Savior who would render the animal sacrifices obsolete. All the animal sacrifices pointed to and alluded to the full and final and complete atonement. And but they were, here we read that they were not to be given cooked, but raw to be cooked by them. And if the man said to them, "Let the fat be burned up first, then take as much as your being desires," he would then answer them, "No, but give it to me now, and if not, I shall take it by strength." So this is take as much as your being as your soul desires or being desires. But they wanted it immediately, and if they didn't get what they wanted, they would overwhelm and overpower and take it by strength and force to get what they wanted. And the sin of the young men was very great before Yahweh, for the men despised the offering of Yahweh. The two men's name were Phinehas and something else. I know we're eventually going to read it. But these two young men were placed in positions of authority and trust, and they did not exercise that authority in a trustworthy matter. They in fact despised the offerings they had overseen and executed. Offerings is another term for sacrifice. It's because we offer an animal in exchange for our sin, and so much so that the terms are used interchangeably throughout the book of Leviticus. But Samuel was attending before Yahweh, a youth wearing a linen shoulder garment. So Samuel was faithful. He was attending before Yahweh as he should and as he was instructed, and there was no... tragically, we read that Samuel's own son suffered the same fate as Eli's son. And again, we're going to avoid speculation as to why that was. Perhaps Samuel was derelict in his fatherly duties, but for all in his defense, he was not derelict in his duties as a prophet, a priest, or a judge. These were his three. He was a triple threat or triple crown person. And his mother would make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. So his biological parents were not completely out of the picture. They had some interaction with his life. They came annually for sacrifices, and they made sure that he was dressed and attired appropriately for his craft. And Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife and said, "Yahweh give you offspring from this woman for the one she prayed for, and gave to Yahweh." Then they would go to their home. So Eli knew that the son Samuel was in response to prayer, and he asked for more of the same for her. So the priestly blessing was in response to Yahweh having blessed her, and they would return to their home after this annual excursion to the site at Shiloh, which is where the sacrificial animals were offered, and their son was instrumental in that process, even though he was but a lad and a youth. So this brings to mind the passage in 2 Timothy where Paul instructs his pastoral protege to let no man despise you because of your youth. Often Yahweh works through young people. When he can't find a faithful old person, he's going to move on to a young person. And that's what we witness in Samuel and a few other people throughout Scripture. And Yahweh visited Hannah so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters, while the young Samuel grew before Yahweh. So 2 things here. One is that we've already mentioned, perhaps unnecessarily many times, the 3 sons and 2 daughters. That's 5 children. So Samuel was not the last. And because Eli had blessed her and asked offspring, plural, for him, his prayer, his request was granted. And Samuel grew before Yahweh. That means that he matured and he developed in the service of Yahweh, and he grew before him. Yahweh was directly involved in his growth and development and maturity process. And Eli was very old and had heard all that his sons were doing to all Israel, how they lay with the women who were assembling at the door of the tent appointment. So Eli was old. He was old in age, and the rumors and the gossip, well, it wasn't really gossip. There was some truth to it that his sons were despising their role. So the they were seducing women they should have been serving at the tent of the appointment. This was reflective of the Canaanite practice. There was a lot of sexuality involved in a lot of the pagan temple religiosity, and it seems anathema to us who are conditioned by the Judeo-Christian culture to associate sex with spirituality, but a lot of these pagan peoples did, and that's because they were lost, they were wayward, they were estranged from Yahweh, and but Eli's sons were pagans themselves. They served in the tent, the tabernacle of Yahweh, but they were acting indistinct from pagans and seducing the women who served with them. And he said to them, "Why do you do deeds like this? For I hear of your evil deeds from all the people." All the people, that means everyone knows, and he can't escape his words, and he wants to know why are they doing this, because he had given them a better example, but had not imparted the necessary instruction. He could not, it was too old in his life to intervene. He was probably derelict in his fatherly duties. His sons were their own men and did their own things, which were not appropriate for their calling or occasion. "Now know, my sons, for it is not a good report that I hear, making the people of Yahweh transgress." So if the priests themselves transgress, the entire role and purpose of the priest was to provide a moral instruction and moral example for the priest. So if the priests are sinning, the people are going to sinning. So their example has a ripple effect beyond themselves. They exist to minister and serve others, and they were serving themselves by gratifying their sexual desire with any young woman who was gathered at the tent of appointment, and that was not good. It seems self-evident, but they were natural men and carnal creatures who were not ashamed or did not think too much about what they were doing and why it was wrong. "If one man sins against another, Elohim shall judge him. But if a man sins against Yahweh, who shall pray for him? But they did not listen to the voice of their father, though it pleased Yahweh to put them to death." Now, all sins, all wrongs, and all offenses we commit against individuals are offenses against Yahweh, because when we sin, we diminish and offend the character, the righteous and sacred character of Elohim. Every sin we do against other people is an offense, but it's especially grievous for priests to sin against Yahweh in the calling of their service. So they cannot expect or hope to escape judgment, and there's no one to pray for you when you deliberately offend Yahweh. And of course, this goes in one ear and out the other, so they don't want to hear it, they don't listen to it, they don't heed the wise advice, they could care less, they're determined to go their own way and do their own thing. But little do they know that Yahweh had determined their death as a result of their apostasy and waywardness. "And the young Samuel was growing in stature, and he was in favor with Yahweh and also with men." So much of what we read of John the Baptist in Luke 1:80 and the Messiah himself in Luke 2:40 and 52, that as a young man he grew in stature and was favorable by Yahweh and with others. So if we are in good standing with Yahweh, we will generally be in good standing with other people. "And a man of Elohim came to Eli and said to him, 'Thus said Yahweh, did I not clearly reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house?'" So Eli was a direct descendant of Aaron's youngest son, and the high priest office was hereditary. So this began when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house, when Aaron was designated the high priest. So this is a man of Elohim. This would have been a lesser priest who approached the high priest, and he's telling him what Yahweh had already told them. "Even to choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my Cohen, to be my priest, to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, and to wear a shoulder garment before me. And did I not give to the house of your father all the offerings of the children of Israel made by fire?" So this was a tremendous privilege and pleasure to be serving in the capacity that he served. And he was, if not himself, he was treating it with contempt by at least allowing and permitting his sons to despise the offerings and to despise their calling and to be indistinct from the pagans. and this was diminishing the efficacy of the sacrifices they offered because they were doing other things outside of the sacrifices, which are not only not appropriate, but an egregious transgression to the calling and the service they were employed in. Why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my temple, and esteem your sons above me, to make yourself fat with the best of all the offerings of Israel, my people? So a common temptation for the priests, this was current in Malachi's day, was to reserve the best meat for themselves. They lived off the sacrificial. They had no income or land or property, so they lived off. They were fed by the sacrifices, but they were commanded to reserve the choicest piece of meats to sacrifice to Yahweh and forgo and forsake that for themselves. But he was esteeming his sons above me in his temple, so he was lax and permissive towards his own sons, and this had a deleterious consequence in his own standing with Yahweh. Eli was not guilty of the sins, but he was indirectly guilty by having failed in his fatherly duties to raise them to be righteous priests. Therefore, Yahweh Elohim of Israel declares, I said indeed that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now Yahweh declares, far be it from me, for those who esteem me I esteem, and those who would despise me are accursed. So how we treat Yahweh will determine how he treats us. If we bless him, he's going to bless us. If we curse him or despise him, we ourselves will be accursed. And the priestly dynasty was established to be in perpetuity. It was to be without beginning and without end. It was preserved all the way up to the intertestamental period, at least until Antiochus sold the priesthood. Antiochus IV, the notorious tyrant of whom we read of in the Deuterocanonical books of the Maccabees, and is also alluded to in Daniel's 11th chapter, the 21st through the 45th verse. He sold the priesthood to the highest bidder, and Antiochus was a man who not only despised the religion of Israel, but despised all religion in general. He had a serious God complex, and he tolerated no rival worship to that of himself. See, the days are coming that I shall cut off your arm and the arms of your father's house, so that an old man shall not be in your house. So their death and their judgment is here declared, and it's going to be inescapable. The days are coming. Now what Yahweh speaks, Yahweh delivers. His word and his promise are as true as the one from whence they come. And you shall see an enemy in my temple, despite all the good which Elohim does for Israel. And they shall not be an old man in your house forever. So their days are doomed, their days are numbered. They chose to be enemies of him, and they would be treated accordingly. But any of your men whom I did not cut off from my altar is to consume your eyes and grieve your life, and the increase of your house die as men. So this is not a pleasant future or expectation, an enviable expectation. He's going to consume their eyes and make their life a living hell by grieving it, and all their future progeny and descendants will die as men prematurely before their time had come to pass. They would not live to see old age. And this is the sign to you that comes upon your two sons, upon Hophni and Phinehas. In one day they are going to die, both of them. So these are the names of Eli's sons, and their death is declared as a consequence of their apostasy. It comes to pass in the 4th through 6th chapter of this book, when the armies of Israel are arrayed against the Philistines, who capture them in the covenant and split their heads open in broad daylight. And I shall raise up for myself a trustworthy priest, who does according to what is in my heart and in my soul. And I shall build him a steadfast house, and he shall walk before my anointed forever. Now the immediate fulfillment of this prophecy was Samuel, who was, despite his age, a more trustworthy and worthy priest, who did according to what he was told, and he was in his heart. In this we read also that he will choose a king who is after his own heart in 1 Samuel 13:14, and it's designed to be in perpetuity, to last forever, and to be permanent. And the final verse we're going to cover, and it shall be that everyone who is left in your house shall come and bow down to him for a piece of silver and a cake of bread, and say, please put in one of the priest positions to eat a piece of bread. So we ultimately didn't have enough time. We could have disciplined it more in hindsight. We did not comment as extensively as we would like to, somewhat beginning in the 30th verse, but we're cutting close to the 30-minute mark. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.